Hi, welcome to Mom. My name's Kimberly Anderson, and I'm on the leadership team. And whether this is your first time joining us or you're a Mom regular, we're so glad that you're here. We meet the first Thursday of every month from September to May, and we'd love to have you join us sometime. Thanks so much for tuning in, and enjoy the teaching.
Well, good morning. Another welcome to a November Mom. As you obviously say hi to Lori and Anna. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a couple minutes. There's just a couple things I wanted to run through real quick, kind of connecting us to last month and what we've been talking to and heading us into this one. We've been talking about habits and rhythms in our families, right? And those that might need a little tweak here and there, or maybe there's some that actually need a totally different perspective altogether. So that's what we've been looking at. We've been talking about roots and shoots. Roots last year, shoots this year. That's what, again, we're still focusing on that. Last month, we talked about discipline and discipleship because that's where we get a lot of our questions from. And so we wanted to take a look at some of those habits. If you weren't here, you can jump back online and watch that. That's kind of the foundation for what we're doing today. Do you need a little help here? Are we all good?
Just falling apart. Thank you.
So one of the things that we learned last month is that discipline and discipleship have the same root word, right? And that means to instruct or to teach. And so if we're asking questions about discipline, we're also talking about discipleship because they're training up their hearts. So that was the foundation so that when we get to the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts today, the 3-year-old who screams when you're trying to put him in the car seat, the 13-year-old who doesn't want to abide by the rule of not having their phone in their room at night, those types of things. You just know what the foundation for what we were doing with that, okay? There were some resources that I've shown 2 of you. I want to show you a couple more because it's important to us that we get resources in your hands. God's Word is our foundational resource. We talked about that last month. But habits of the household, do we have that slide, Matt? That one we've been talking about. I think Carrie still has a couple of copies back there. Oh, they're right here. Highly recommend you get a hold of that, okay? Do it as a table group or do it with your spouse. Read through it with your spouse. It's really easy read and a fun read, but very helpful. Do it as a book club. It's a very simple one to do. So feel free to pull out your phones and take pictures of this. This next one, I told you last month, I did not teach on control. But if you feel that you're kind of parenting from a control-based place, that's not going to be healthy. And so Sharon Hottie Miller has a new book out. It's very, very good. I highly recommend that. The next one is a book by Sissy Goff, which are called Are My Kids on Track? She actually has multiple books. I didn't put multiple pictures up there. One called Raising Worry-Free Girls, plus several other ones. I recommend any book by her. She is a counselor. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But the next one there, I want to mention by Dave Thomas. We click over to that one. Do we have that? Okay. Highly, highly recommend this one. It's called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. Even if you have girls, read it. It's excellent. Now, Dave Thomas and Sissy Goff are part of a counseling cohort almost back in the southeast in Tennessee called Daystar. And they focus on children and adolescents. They have multiple counselors and programs there. They have an excellent podcast called Raising Girls and Boys. They have a lot of different people on there. If you happen to be on social media, on Instagram, Sissy Goff has an outstanding Instagram feed. It's like getting free counseling. She puts up these great 2- and 3-minute stories that are so helpful and so informative and instructive. So I just want to get some of those resources in front of you. If you're a reading person and that's helpful to you, you can take a look at some of those. All right, just a couple things before we head into the Q&A, and that is we are not the experts, okay? It would be not wise to assume that we are the experts or that your mentor moms are the experts. It's just that we've all been around the room a few more times than you have, all right? We're in a little different season of life. So hopefully everything that we're expressing to you, you'll be able to glean some things that will be helpful to you within your family today, okay? Several of you submitted questions ahead of time. Thank you for doing that. Kimberly's going to be handling that today. And if you don't hear your specific question asked, it may be just because we grouped it in to another question. So feel free to reach out to any of us or to Carrie if you have further questions afterwards, and we can get a hold of you and maybe answer that if you want a little more specifics about that. One of the questions that has already come up multiple times, is probably going to come up today, is around spanking. If you were in Mom to Mom a couple of years ago, we addressed this with a panel. Gail was on that panel, Kimberly was there, Megan was there, and I was there. And we talked about different aspects of that. And one of the things you found out very quickly is that there were 3 of the people on that panel who held a very particular direction in what they've done in their family, and one that didn't. And I was the didn't of that, all right? I held a different view from that. And I think that was healthy for all of you to hear and understand from our different places around the table why we've made the decisions that we did. And because of that, and one of the questions that came up, I want to make sure you understand there's a difference between the word punishment and discipline. And you should not be punishing your child, ever, okay? That's retributive. Do not punish your child. That is pushing a child backwards in what you're putting on them. Discipline is dealing with whatever the issue is, taking whatever actions that you're needing to move that child forward in their learning, in their growth, in their spiritual development. All right? A big difference. I said last month that I'm a word person, and I said, say what you mean and mean what you say. Why? Because that's a biblical principle. And we get a little lazy with our words, and we'll say to our kids, hey, your punishment is so-and-so. Move yourself off of that. Think about it from discipline and discipleship. That will be a big shift in your family and in your habits and rhythms, okay? And when it comes to the spanking issue, we're not going to solve that today. There are definitely different views on that, and if you would like to talk more about that, talk to us, talk to Carrie, talk to Kimberly, talk to Rayanne, but we're not going to solve that one today. So hopefully we're trying to move you towards the discipline side of things, and that will help you a little bit as you walk through all this, okay? All right, I'm going to let these 2 do a real quick introduction of themselves, and then Kimberly's going to take over. So, Anna, you go.
Okay. I'm Anna Furry, and I've been married for 30 years, and I have 2 daughters. Kylie is 26. Will be 27 next month, and just got married last spring. And Emily is 25 and has been married for 4 years, I believe, and has a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old.
My name is Lori Camp, and I'm married to JT, and we've been married for 24 years. And we have 4 kids. Grace is 22, and she's living in New York. And Seth is 20, and he's living in Arizona, going to school. He has a very sweet girlfriend, so we count her as ours also, because we really like her. And then we have another one that's staying with us, who's 22. And Courtney has been with us off and on for about 2 years. And then we have Ava, who's 17. She's a senior, and Pete is 14, and he's a freshman. So we finally got out of junior high.
Yay! Yay! You guys know me for the most part, but I as well, David and I have been married 30 years as of a couple of weeks ago. And we have 4 children between the ages of 20 and 27. I have 4 granddaughters. And let's see, my youngest is up at University of Washington up in Seattle. And the other 3 are all here locally, which is wonderful for right now that I get to bask in having them near and dear to us. I did want to say, because we record in the morning, just be careful with questions if you end up talking on the mic in terms of confidentiality. If there's something that you don't want expressed, be careful using names and places and stuff, and protect our kids a little bit. I feel the same way, particularly with Lori, because she's still got a couple here in the high school. So just know we need to handle information and any stories expressed well, okay? All right, Kimberly.
Okay, so Missy asked me to facilitate the panel this morning, and so I thought, perfect. I get to ask my question first and make sure it gets asked. But thinking through just parenting questions, had a scenario come up that comes up almost every day. Boys playing, and somebody does something back. oldest shoves youngest to the ground. I quickly jump in before anybody punches, get them apart. And then it's like trying to, on the spot, come up with like, how do we make this right? And so, obviously I diffuse the situation, but then trying to come up with consequence. So I tell my oldest son, okay, you're gonna go in your room, and tonight you're gonna do James's chores. And James goes, I don't want him to do my chores. I want him to go outside and play football with me. And I said, okay, that. So my question is just, when we're in those moments, how do you come up with an appropriate consequence? How do you know when you can give a consequence on the spot and when not? How do you try to do a natural consequence? And so just how did you walk through that process when you're trying to help reconcile the relationship, correct the behavior, all of that?
Well, I'm going to say that someone asked my kids the other day, who do you get along with? What other kid do you get along with in the family? And one of my kids said, well, we all get along. And I was like, wow, because that's not because of something we did, but they worked a lot of things out on their own. So as far as consequence, I feel like we were just sometimes doing what you're doing, like we're just grabbing, like what can we try and do? And somehow God works that out. Like I worry less now about the little, like not the little things, but like how I do it, but just getting it done, giving some sort of consequence. I think the consistency of giving the consequence is more important probably than like what the consequence is. I am one who tends to stick to rules, so if I say like your consequence is gonna be this, I tend to, because that's just how I am, to wanna do what I said. No, but I said this is the way it's gonna be. And sometimes like it's empowering to the kid to get to say, this is what I want. Well, can you go ask your brother for that? Can you say, Mom says this is your consequence. Would you rather play with me or do this? And let them work it out.
Yeah, and gosh, I think that a lot of in the moment consequences for me, I would sometimes separate and not give an answer right away. Like for me, I would have to cool off and say that, Mom needs to think about it. I did that a lot because I did spank, and so I never wanted to give a consequence in anger. And so I would separate them, separate myself, and sometimes come back and then give it. I don't think that they need an immediate answer. I don't think you need to do an immediate consequence. I think there needs to be immediate action. And I think like what Lori said, I think that consistency is really, really, really important. It's exhausting. But also I like, the idea of like, well, what do you think would be, and asking, I love that. I did that. My kids fought all the time. I remember crying because they're super close. They're 16 months apart, and they're so different, and they would fight all the time. And I just prayed a lot, and I'm like, Lord, please, please let them be friends someday. And now they're best friends. And I think like Lori says, we worry so much about like how our actions are gonna scar them for life or whatever. And God works it out. But I don't have a really solid answer for that. I'm sorry.
Ann and I both asked our kids about these, some of these questions.
That's why I have my notes. I gave my kids a list of questions, and I let them answer, because so often you have mom amnesia, and so you think it went a certain way, or you wished it would have went a certain way. And so I wanted to hear from them what they took away from how we disciplined, how we discipled, and it was super insightful.
And they didn't remember the specifics. My kids didn't. They really didn't remember the specifics of what the consequences were at all, and they didn't hold that against me. Other things, yes.
Yeah, my kid, they both said they remembered getting spanked, but they both said they remembered that I never did it in anger, and that there was always a cooling off period and lots of conversations. So,
okay, sorry, Kimberly. The other thing that they did say about when they would fight, a lot of times they said I didn't actually see the whole thing, and they have videotape to prove it. Of Seth pushing someone down and Pete punching him back, and then me disciplining Pete. And I thought I saw the whole thing. So I did not clearly catch all the things that they did wrong. So.
And there were no cell phones for my kids. Like, I'm too old for that, so I never saw anything.
Anything else to add on that, Missy?
I was just going to say I would be focusing more on the action of what's happening than necessarily having a consequence. I don't think my kids had all that many consequences. That may be a fault, actually. I'm not sure. But intervening at the moment, one of the questions I was going to ask you is that a regular pattern of behavior for the older one or the younger one? And if that's the case, then you need to address that. But if it's a one-off here and there, or it was just a day where one was super tired and from school all day, and now they're just getting too much input from the little one or whatever, there's probably not even any consequence for that, other than an action of, yeah, we're not doing that, and whatever separation you need to do with that. So
to be totally honest, I have mom guilt right now, but Kylie would often come to me and say, Emily hit me, Emily hit me. Like, it was always Emily's fault, and Kylie would always come and tell, and I wouldn't see it. And so one time, I think they were probably in upper elementary school, and I just looked at Kylie and I go, punch her back. Because she would never do anything. Like, she wouldn't defend herself. She would just run to me. And before that, it was always like, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's talk it out. Let's work it out. And Kylie just looked at me like with these wide eyes like, you want me to punch her? And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do about it? Yeah. And it wasn't my proudest mom moment. She didn't punch her, except for later. Is Nicole Cadillac in the room? Or...
No.
She punched her later in high school in the pool playing water polo, and that was like, the one time there was physical consequence for Emily's action. But yeah, not the greatest mom moment. So you do say things that you think, oh my gosh, I've just ruined my child, but they're fine.
So if you guys have questions, hold them up, and I'll be walking through, and I'll try to grab them. But one that was emailed before is, what is your take on positive reinforcement, so stickers and rewards versus negative reinforcements? Can you do one without the other? If you only do the positive, is it causing them to just do good things for a reward instead of doing it because it's right?
Well, I'll respond to part of that, and then I'll let them jump in with that. I think we've talked about before that rewarding a skill is good. How we reward behaviors, I think you need to think about that, because you're trying to create a behavior in them. I'm not saying not to reward that, but I think sometimes when we reward a behavior, other than just a hug and a whisper in the ear of, I saw that was really good, that then there's the temptation is that you're not dealing with their heart, and then they're like, well, I'm going to go hug my sibling because I know I'm going to get 3 M&Ms for doing that. Or I'm good, so I think there is a little bit of a line there, but.
I love charts. I think they're the best.
I hated them.
It's because I love charts in my own life, though, so I put them on my kids, and they had charts to get ready in the morning, and they had charts and tickets to earn TV time. They had every, positive kind of thing, and I thought it was great. The rewards were always very small, though, that they earned. And then we did spankings, too. We did a lot of timeouts. We did a lot of sitting by yourself in the kitchen and just watching mom just sitting on the stool and not being able to leave. There was a book I read one time that talked about staking tomatoes. That's how you raised your kids. That when you stake tomatoes, you tie them to the, what's that thing called? Like the trellis kind of thing. And then they needed to stay next to you. And when my kids were misbehaving, that's more what we did, is they had to stay next to mom. And that's a punishment. Who wants to stay next to mom?
It's a consequence.
Okay, it's a
Yes,
consequence.
It's a consequence.
We're still learning.
We're reframing.
Well, Anna, you mentioned this to me the other night. We were talking about, hey, the discipline of an 8-month-old is not any different than the discipline of a 15-month-old or 15-year-old. It's just how this one you might be redirecting them, and her redirect for the 15-year-old was, guess what? You're riding home in the car with mom now. See, it's that sticking next to them.
Yeah, no, I love that. I know that's when they get their driver's license. It's super sad because all that discipleship time, right? So I think like catching your kids doing good things is really great. And then instead of positive reinforcement, focus on their positive identity. I think like catching them and saying, that's just like you, or that's just like us. Like we were big Team Free people. And so we were like, yay, Team Free, you know? Like this is how Team Free behaves and this is what it looks like to be in this family. And I think Gail actually, because I used to do Tuesday morning Bible study when I had young kids, and Gail was kind of my mentor back then. And I just remember like they were like a big team family. And so I think catching them is really cool. And enforcing it when you catch it and it being more spontaneous. And I like what Missy and Lori talked about this too. It's like we're trying to help them become, you know, people that can make good decisions on their own without us, right? And so they're not always going to have a positive, you know, reinforcement for that positive behavior. You want them to do that because it's the right thing to do, right? And so I think positive identity is really, really, really key. I think when we have a consequence, like research shows that guilt is good, right? Like having guilt for things that we did that were wrong actually is good for us, and it helps create a better human being versus shame. Right? And I think that's like when Missy was talking about punishment, we don't want to say shame. Like shame is you're bad or you're dumb, right? No, guilt is you did something wrong, you did something bad, you know, let's talk about it. So I think catching the good and saying it's just like you, and then redirecting the negative behavior, like that's not who you are, right? Saying things like that.
I think also on the negative is not sparing them from the natural consequences that come.
Yes.
So if they're being mean to their friend and their friend doesn't want to play with them, to be honest with them, like I think they might not want to play with you because you weren't very nice last time.
Yeah,
Instead of thinking that they can't handle some of that truth.
absolutely. Hey, Kimberly, I think, did you have a question over here too? Did you hand it in? Okay, all right.
So this question is more specific to having younger children. So discipline and discipleship seems most applicable once a child can talk and reason. Besides starting habits of discipline, leading by example, how is discipline carried out before a baby can talk and understand verbal reasoning? Or, yeah.
Anna, go ahead.
I learned a lot from my mom about this because when I had Kylie, I didn't think that she understood as much as she did before she could talk, but they can understand so much, right? But I think redirecting, like picking them up and removing them from a situation is, you know, a lot of times too when my children couldn't talk and they were misbehaving or throwing a tantrum, I would remove them from where we were at, whether it was a restaurant or something I was really enjoying, which was really hard, right? And then sometimes just like, I think in doing that too, and taking them to a dark, quiet place, holding them close, it all teaches them how to self-regulate at a very young age, right? And that's what we want. We want our children to self-regulate. I asked my younger daughter about if we taught them self-control, and that word was very triggering for her. She did not like self-control at all. But what I really mean is self-regulation. Like, how do we teach our children to self-regulate? And I work with high school kids, mostly freshmen right now, and there's such a lack of self-regulation. Self-control, discipline, whatever you want to say. And I think that you can really start that when they're young, like redirecting, even though they're not verbal. I walked into my mom's house one day to pick up Kylie, and she was just walking, and I started picking up the toys and putting them in the toy box. And my mom's like, stop doing that, she can do it. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And mom's like, watch this. And mom told her to put her toys, and mom had demonstrated and taught her how to do that. So there's a lot of understanding going on, especially with your body language and your tone and how you react. I think there's a lot of training that happens.
Before I say this, I want to say, like, I know a lot of you guys, and you guys are already doing really good.
Yeah.
So don't think that, like, just
Yeah.
because this is what we say, that you should go home and be like, we have to change everything we're doing. Do not do that. But if you're like, this isn't working for me, and I need to try something different because it's not working, then that's when I would take a suggestion. Other than that, you can just sort through it.
I agree.
When our kids are really little, we were very big on a schedule. And that was partly because we didn't want a kid-centered household. We really wanted to be about what was best for the family. And so our kids were very scheduled. They went to bed at the same time every night. They got up at the same time every morning. They ate at the same time. They took naps at the same time. Everyone had quiet time at the same time. And I feel like that's building in some of those habits of discipline and just learning how it works to follow the rules. And so that, to me, we started when the kids were too young. I won't even tell you how young they were because you'll be mad at me.
Yeah.
Lori and I were talking last night, and we both did the same curriculum, and it just really struck a chord with me and my husband with the scheduling. And if you know me, you know I'm not a scheduled person. I'm like Miss Spontaneous. I love to be spontaneous. I love to go. I have huge FOMO. And so I do. And so scheduling, but I like the idea of and I understood too, I think human beings like rhythms and routines.
Yeah.
Like we have a natural rhythm and routine, and children especially. And the more that I understand how the brain works, the more that I understand that this is such a good thing. And I had before I even understood, I had an older woman say to me, Anna, the best advice I could give you is early bedtime. And she said, and her reasoning was because then you can spend more time with your husband, right? But early bedtime, I mean, it fit right in with the schedule, and it was a lifesaver. But it was also, I found out later when I started teaching health, that it's so good for brain development, right? Yep. So, we did the same curriculum. And it got a lot of backlash because it's so rigid, but I just did it with some common sense. And if I wanted to do Tuesday beach day, I would take my kids and bump their schedule back, and I would just suffer for it because there were consequences with that. But I love the schedule.
I'm right there with them because I did the same curriculum as well. And I think it's...
What was the curriculum you guys are all talking about?
It has first it was BabyWise. And so BabyWise, that's how I got my children sleeping through the night super early. But then it was Growing Kids God's Way, which is a terrible title because God doesn't have one way that we grow our children. But there's just a lot of really great tools that came out of that.
And you need to adjust it for your families. We've talked about that a lot before, that what your best friend's going to do and what you may do may be very different. Every family does have that kind of natural rhythm that's their family. So you just need to take these little pieces of information and look at your family. Don't look at someone else's, and see what works with you. But I would amen all that.
And the premise, like Lori said, the premise is that it's like not a child-centered home,
right.
It's a God-centered home. And so God is in the center, and then your marriage, right? Because what is your family without your marriage? And then your marriage, and then your children are a welcome addition.
And right now in our culture, that's all very counterculture at the moment. So,
a good thing that I remember from when I had young was like this idea of a popsicle principle. So saying, like I just had my niece, so I'll say, Lennon, if you can go to the refrigerator and I'll get you a popsicle. And if she's old enough to understand, go to the refrigerator, and then this good thing will happen, she's also old enough to understand the reverse. If you do this, this will happen. So I want to say that was probably around 18 months, somewhere in there, just to give that kind of general idea. And that's a good way to gauge what your kids are able to track. If you do this, this will happen, then the same thing is true, going the opposite way. Okay. I'm going to go with, what is your strategy on softening a hard character trait? So example is entitlement or a rebellious heart. How do you soften that? And then kind of a two-part, and how do you do that without sowing resentment? Sowing resentment. I'm trying to lump two together.
well, to clarify a little bit on that, I would say a rebellious heart actually is sin. So you're dealing with one thing there. Entitlement or a hard characteristic entitlement was probably created, so you need to take a look at how that is even coming about. But characteristics is how God probably made that child. And so it's not a matter of removing that. It's a matter of softening some of those edges as they're growing through that to when they become an adult, I think is probably what the question is there. Why don't you guys give some input and then I'll follow. Do you want to?
This just reminds me of what a bad mom I was. We didn't have a plan. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have super great advisors. We were just swinging by the chandeliers trying to figure it out. So we did a lot of different things for entitlement. There was a day when we fed our kids only beans and rice because they were being picky about the food, and we were like, we're not doing this. People all over the world live on beans and rice. Let's see how it is. So was it nice? I don't know, but it made my kids really be nicer about what they ate, The other part about, just your kids, how your kids are and that those character traits is, I think what my kids would say is they just really wanted me to love them.
Yeah.
They were going through a lot of things in their head, which when they're 5 years old and they say this is the worst thing that's ever happened, it really is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And to understand, for them, this is hard. And a lot of times I think they just wanted me to stop and listen to them and not be distracted and not try and fix them maybe, but to sit with them and how they were feeling about it more.
Yeah, I have two very different personalities in my children, and my youngest is very strong-willed, very, very strong-willed. And I remember a woman gave me a book called Raising Strong-Willed Children, or I don't know, what was the title? Something like that. And I never read it, and I always I felt so guilty about not reading it, because I'm like, I probably could have got some really great tools, and I just was... I do still feel guilty. But I asked my children, some questions about disciplining them. And Emily, my youngest, the one that was very strong-willed, and I can say this, she knows it, I talked to her about it. I think that the entitlement, we did a lot of hard things together as a family. So we, they worked really hard. They helped other people a lot. We had a lot of people in our home a lot and had hard conversations with people around my children. And so one of the things she said too is just, I don't know, she said that we gave her a lot of space to make mistakes, but that we talked through a lot of it. And so I think that, I'm trying to find what she said about it. Sorry. I can't find it, but anyways, just that having that strong-willed child is just it's really taxing, and it wears on you because, you're like, I don't want to crush the spirit.
That's right.
Right? But I also need to this child needs to learn that they're not the center of the world. And one thing that I prayed for a lot is that God would use that strength for his glory. And she is a champion of the marginalized. She is so strong-willed about looking out for people that are underprivileged and marginalized. And I knew that I just had a really deep faith that when God got a hold of her, that she would be really strong about the Lord. And so when you have that strong-willed child, I would encourage you to pray for that and try not to squash it, but have a lot of conversations and a lot of prayer around it. I felt like I was floundering the whole time with her. I really did. So
that strong-willedness will be one of their greatest traits when they're older. It's just a matter of how you shepherd that during their younger, and you don't want to squash it, but you definitely want to direct it. And on the entitlement thing, I would be exposing my children to all those environments safely where they are seeing people with a lot less who really do have hard lives. I think it's okay when they're little for them to see that and have those conversations, because they will ask as they're ready to ask. So you need to be ready to answer.
Yeah, we did foster care for a while, which is great because the kids got to really see the parents of those kids coming in, to drop off the kids and things like that. That was great. We went to things that we thought that were hard for us or not even useful ended up really impacting our kids. We went to, in our community group, we went to Danish care and sat with the people with Alzheimer's and played games with them. And it was really hard for the adults to go because we were not getting anything out of it. And I cannot believe like the impact some of those little things that we thought were like this is a kind of a waste of time that have really impacted our kids. So if like you feel like the Holy Spirit's leading you to do something that you're like, I don't know, this doesn't even seem like it's worth it. It may, and down the road, God uses all of those things. The littlest things, it's crazy to see how God uses them when your kids get older.
My kids' elementary school in San Luis, there was a senior home that was down the road. And in first grade, at the holiday season, they would learn some Christmas carols, and they would walk them down the street, and they would go and they would sing for all those people that were living there. And every single one of those kids, including all 4 of mine, will tell you how impacted they were as a first grader. Of remembering going and doing that and what they saw and what they experienced and just sticking with them. So opportunities.
I forgot about that too. Like with 4-H, my girls did a lot of community service in convalescent homes.
That's
and
right.
then one thing Emily mentioned was that how we walked with them through death, because they had some people that they knew very well, very close to them, die when they were in like upper elementary school, and even going to his bedside like as he is actually dying, and then walking through them with other people and their friends losing parents, or when my dad died, and just those hard things, and like walking with them through that, I think really helps with soften their heart.
Tips for disrespectful attitudes.
At any age?
This just says especially with boys, but yeah, let's just go with at any age.
6 years old.
Well, there's a consequence for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I think teaching your children to be respectful and understanding why we don't talk to people that way, why we don't treat people that way. But it's hard because their heart has to come around to that too and understand. And so I think consequences help with that.
Is it towards you or towards other kids?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan, and I don't know if this really applies, but I'm a huge fan of teaching kids scripture, and not using it like to lord it over them, but just so that they understand what God's word says about things. Not using it like even in when they're being disciplined, just so that it's in their heart. And so I think I'd spend my time, like when I look at time that I spent with my kids, teaching them scripture was never a waste of time. So it's not really saying how to discipline them, but just I think maybe I'd spend time putting as much scripture as I can into them, because God will bring that back to them later when they're older.
For me, that's a no-fly zone. You are disrespectful to anyone. You roll your eyes at me, and we will stop right then and there, because that's a passive-aggressive way of being disrespectful. So I think there's 2 parts of that were for me. Is one, where are they seeing that? Okay, so what is it that they're observing and seeing where disrespect in that, whether it be spoken or body language, that they are seeing that? And that probably needs to be addressed. If it's because of screen time, that screen time needs to go away to something else. What's happening? I have found that to really be a learned behavior, so they're observing it someplace. And to me, the consequence, I'm not sure I was able to ever consequence that one out, other than it was a full stop wherever we were. And I made sure that my anger didn't rise up to that, because that didn't help that. But very clearly in their ear, they heard how I felt about that and why we don't do that. One, God loves everyone. This is a full stop, and you need to understand that. A 6-year-old can understand that. 15-year-old can really understand that. So, yeah. Stay at it. Stay at it. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing.
When we've had issues with disrespect toward coaches, towards teachers, towards yard duties, Not that it's ever happened, but maybe it has. So we'll talk about it, and then we'll go back. And so I had a good friend early on give me like a quick formula, and it was, I'm sorry for, it was wrong because, next time I will. And so when they go to apologize, they will write a letter, and then I will probably go with them, or we will call the coach, and they will have to go through that. I'm sorry for being disrespectful. It was wrong because you're my coach, and next time I will do what you ask, or whatever. And so making them apologize, and I try to tell my boys it's okay to fail. Everybody fails,
That's right.
But how we respond to that failure shows who we are. And so we've had to go multiple times back to adults and walk through that formula. So I'm sorry for, it was wrong because, next time I will. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like when your children see you apologize for your behavior, or see you and your husband apologize to each other for your behavior, I think that's really, really healthy. Like I don't remember my parents ever saying they were sorry for any of their transgressions and the way they mishandled some things. And so I think that we tried really hard to model that for our children with each other. And then Emily did mention the time that I had her write letters to people that she had been disrespectful for and had let down. And I think holding them to that consequence of going back to that person. And so you just have to keep at it. And that's what I mean by consequence.
That's
it's
right.
like there's got to be something done, right? There needs to be a redirect, and then even maybe I really like what Kimberly said.
And giving them space to do it right.
It took days.
Yeah, they're
and
going to do
sometimes
it
it was
wrong.
like,
Give
well,
them a
until
chance
you
to
do this,
right.
there's no screen time. And sometimes it took days for them to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Totally. It was miserable. Did you ever get to a point where no form of discipline would work for one of your children, and what would you do?
Oh, okay. Yes.
That was quick.
My first knows that she was the hardest. She'll tell you that she was the hardest one. And when she was, I'll tell you, those junior high girls, they will get you every time. She was so hard in junior high. And at one point, my husband said to me and Grace, "Girls, knock it off." And I was like, oh my gosh. And he was right. And he took over parenting her for a season, because there was too much between us and we're so much alike that he stepped in and he was the one who started dealing with her behavior. And it was great, because then it allowed me to actually have a nice conversation with her and not have to parent her. And he just he's very black and white, no. And she was like, fine, and then did it. So that was great. I tried to get him to do it with all of them, but he wouldn't do it with all of them.
He wasn't game.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I just remember Chris coming home from the high school and just being in tears, because I felt like all I did was discipline Emily all day long, and I felt like nothing was working. And that was most of my parenting with her, unfortunately. I think that in the moment I felt like I wasn't doing anything right, but I think now in retrospect and hearing from her, there was a lot that she took away from that. But we just had a lot of conversations. Chris helped a lot. And then he also did some harm too, right? So, it was a struggle. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that. I just remember praying a lot and crying a lot.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that either. My daughter is here, and we definitely went through a season that I don't think it was a lack of parenting. She was just making her own decisions, and we were having to live through those decisions. And so I just think that happens. And it really is just a deep, deep season of prayer, and holding on to hope and faith, and knowing that God really does have your kids, and it really puts you at that place of, you know what, they're young adults, they're going to make their decisions. We've done everything we can, and we're continuing to do everything we can, and we've seen great fruit. We see great fruit in her at this point from that. So.
And I think this question was specifically asked by somebody with a younger kid.
Okay.
So if it is,
Can you clarify?
For my 3-year-old son, this is the best part about him, but also very difficult to discipline, because he's so positive. He's his dad. I give him a timeout or take something away or any of these forms of discipline, and
Yeah.
But right now, it's like, I don't know what to do.
Is
Does
re-
it, does
Oh, go
it
ahead.
change his behavior?
That's what I was just going to ask.
The behavior keeps repeating. Whether it's hitting a sister or stealing something or whatever the behavior is, it continues.
And he doesn't mind being alone.
And even like,
If he has to stay in the kitchen next to me, if he has to be by himself, if he's not allowed to do this, he'll just think of something else to do.
there's nothing that he loves that you can take away and it makes an impact.
Just find something else to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really such a great problem to have. I know.
That's interesting.
So there's some crowd feedback from our teen mom table saying, is there anything he hates to do? Like jobs, chores. I mean, I
He's
can see
pretty
him being
little.
pretty happily working though.
He's so little. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, clean baseboards, take out trash, stack, unload dishwasher, just giving chores, dog poop. I don't know. Keep working at it. Good luck.
Because he's little.
I think even if it's not, like in that respect, even if it's not helping him too much, if it's helping you,
Yeah.
like that he's doing the dishes and then you don't have to do it, great. That's like, to me, sometimes the wins are not what I want them to be.
Yeah. Okay, so this is how do you navigate a negative crowd pulling at your child? And how do you know when to intervene? You can discuss things privately. Do you cut off a friendship, though, with a negative pull from a negative crowd? We want them to make their own decisions, but at the same time, they're young. So how do you navigate that kind of situation? So this is, middle school-ish, maybe upper elementary.
Yeah. I'm waiting for them to go. You want to think?
I'm trying to think. My kids didn't have really negative crowds until high school, but I'm trying to think why. I think that when they were young, when we first started having children, we started kind of separating from people that parented, or didn't parent, I guess, maybe, that didn't parent. And that sounds really harsh, but that was having a negative impact on my kids when they were really young. And so we limited time. We made stronger connections and stronger friends with people that maybe were more like-minded in how they wanted to raise their children. And I don't know if that sounds terrible, but that's what we did. And then I think that having people in our home, I tried to be the house, and so I controlled who was coming over and who wasn't coming over. And then getting my kids involved in things that I knew would be, I'm sorry, but 4-H is one of the best things you can get your kids involved in, hands down, because they learned hard work and they work hard with other kids, and that was just so great. But I just controlled a lot of the narrative in my own home and had it in my home. And I also drove a lot, and I planned a lot of get-togethers. And but I don't remember middle school, or upper elementary being really that difficult as far as a negative crowd.
Well, can I get a definition of what we mean by negative? Because I think I'm going to ask my daughter a question on that, because I think she would have input on that. So when you say negative, what are we talking?
I think we're talking about bad influence.
Bad influences? Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
It's more I would say bad influences, kids that want to be high schoolers already.
Right.
But they're also kind of joined because I have them in my home. And
Right.
I carpool them, and it's sports related. And I'm the one that's oh, your parents aren't around, I'll take you. So then I'm did I do this? Now you have the most connections with this crowd. But you're discipling to them too. We are, and they know they have a house, they know they can come and get loved on, but I'm there are some fruits that are coming that I'm oh golly, I don't want those fruits, I want these fruits.
Yeah.
So,
That's really hard. I had a lot of older kids in my house when my kids were young that were all there were Christians. Like I invited, like I had the, like people would say to me, aren't you worried that your girls are around so many high school kids? Because there were high school kids in my home all the time, but they were Christians. And so that was a really great example for my children. But it's hard when you want to be the person that's helping and like reaching out and like your kids are, you're trying to help those kids that don't have great families and all that. I understand that. I don't know that I have an answer for that.
I think you probably already know my answer, Kelly, but we put lots of limits on how much time we spend with other people. So we have, like Courtney living with us is great. She's solid Christian. She's been a great influence on us, but we're not that house that has lots of people over. When we're home, it's kind of just more our family and maybe a couple extra people, but we did it different. We just had less people in our house. But honestly, it was because my kids didn't want to bring people over, and that's just the way it ended up. So it wasn't a conscious decision we made. But I'm kind of glad that's how it was, because it gave us more time to focus on our kids and a couple extras. I mean, we did foster care. We've had people live with us off and on, but not too many people. The thing that I've seen the most answer to prayer, though, was probably when we were fasting for our kids, is that we saw specific sins brought out. We saw kids come to us and confess sins we didn't know that they had. We saw God reveal them accidentally to us, their sin. So I would say the other thing is fasting for your kids.
Gail?
So one thing, my middle daughter, when she was in high school, freshman, so I don't know your child's age, had a friendship that was really a negative influence on her. And we knew that, we were fully aware of it, but we also knew that if we came down really hard on her, they would make her seek that friend all that much more. So we allowed that friendship, but we kind of put parameters on it. So that girl was welcome in our home. She could spend the night at our house. Her parents had divorced, and one had a live-in boyfriend or girlfriend, etc. And so our daughter was not allowed to spend the night at her house, either of her parents' houses. So we just put parameters on it. That caused problems with those parents, and our daughter so resented it at the time. 2 years later, she forsook that friendship herself and realized that it was very unhealthy for her. That was a huge answer to prayer, obviously. So we allowed it, but we did put parameters on it, talking to her the whole time as to why. And she really did like our reasons why at times. But the Lord ended up using that, and now she's a mom, and she's like, Mom, I can't believe it. But that was the best thing you could have done. But that must have been so hard. And I'm like, "Oh, it does come back."
So can I say one more thing to that, Kimberly, before we go on?
Sure.
Okay. Em, I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I probably erred on both sides of that as a mom. So I erred on allowing you to have people around you that were not good influences, that influenced decisions, but I also erred at different times on only having you around Christian families and not having some exposure. So any thoughts on that? Which way? You got a little one right there, which,
I think with the friends that would bring negative or bad influence, I think it wasn't until that friend hurt me that I knew. And it was just a one-time, it was when I was in junior high.
right, yeah,
When that happened, it pulled me away from that group, from that crowd, and those temptations of wanting to be friends with them and do things that probably weren't appropriate for that age went away.
okay,
It wasn't until I was hurt by that friend that I really saw it from more of your point of view and
right,
other friends' points of view. So it took me getting
Yeah.
to see that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, it had nothing to do with me. It was really, it was her being wise and finally, unfortunately, and the one thing we haven't talked about too much is that as moms, our hearts absolutely get crushed when our kids get crushed. And so that's a hard place. Thanks, Em.
So kind of similar, but balancing trusting teens, but also giving freedom. So how, and especially when they haven't given you reason to doubt them, but at the same time, trying to make good decisions and help and encouraging them. So they get offended, they feel like you don't trust them, but at the same time, you're still trying to be guardrail. So how do you balance that?
Well, I tried to say yes as much as possible with my children. And so and that was all growing up. It was like I said yes as much as possible. One, because I hated that my mom just would say no because I told you so, and I never it just drove me nuts. So it came out of that a little bit, but also because I wanted my no's to really mean something. And so I expressed all through their childhood that, mom is going to say yes as much as possible. When I say no, it's either because I'll have a good reason and I'll share that with you, or sometimes it's just going to be I have a gut feeling about something and you're going to have to trust me. So saying yes as much as possible is great. But Emily was talking about how she struggled in high school a lot. That's kind of where all the wheels fell off with her, and as much as walking away from her faith, which was just devastating. But she said that she appreciated that we gave her space in her messiness and had lots of conversations and a lot of grace with her. But I think that trust is earned, it's I'm going to trust you until you prove that you're not trustworthy, and then there's a consequence and we'll deal with that then. So that was kind of our approach.
That was my question.
Yeah.
What she read. But my teens are coming up on getting licenses, and I was like, oh, I gotta download this app so I can track you and see how fast you're going and all this stuff. And they're like, no. They're like, why would you do that? But all the other parents I know in this day and age are doing that, and they're showing me all these cool technology things to track your children. They're like, why would you do that? Why you don't trust us? And I'm like, dude, but you're also teenagers, so no, I don't. I was a terrible teenager, so.
Right.
I don't know how to balance that.
Yeah, I think that there's an element of faith in there too. You have to give them over to the Lord because essentially He cares about your children more than you do, right? And then I think too, we could drive ourselves crazy with all the technological ways that we could track our children. And I think that, I didn't have that with my girls, and they were fine. I think that having them come home at a certain time, I just had to trust they told me where they were, and then when they were caught and found out, there were consequences. But, and even I always told my girls they wanted to stay out, especially for winter formal or prom, they wanted to come home, at 2 because everybody was going to somebody's house to watch a movie and this and that. And my thing was they always had to be home around 11:30 or 12. But the reasoning behind that is because I wasn't so much concerned about you, but about other drivers on the road, right? Mm-hmm. When do bars close and all those drunk people on the road and you're not super experienced. And so it's not about me not trusting you. I don't trust other people. And so I use that a lot for driving. And then I would make exceptions, or I would say, I'll come pick you up. I made a lot of allowances. I didn't get a lot of sleep. And so I would make a lot of allowances that were very inconvenienced to me and probably weren't great for my health, but I was very available for those types of things.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, lots of more teen specific did you want to hit that real quick?
I think both of us want to hit that one real quick.
Okay.
We'll do it fast.
I'll try and do class. We have the app to trap our kids. The thing is, it also tracks you. So your kids know how fast you're driving as well. So it's interesting. The funny thing is, my kids don't care anymore that I have the app. They expect me to use it to know where they are. So they get annoyed when I text, where are you? When they're like, why didn't you just check my location? So for some things, it's actually useful to use it for that way. The other thing I'd say is I would be in the similar boat probably that you were, and you said that you were a kid that was kind of wild in high school. I was totally wild in high school. And I would just lie to my parents and they would believe me. And so that's where I'm parenting from, is that deficit of thinking that this is how all kids act. And my kids are like, Mom, that is not how we act. And so I had to give my kids a lot more leniency than I would have given myself as a kid, knowing that I would have taken advantage of it. My kids generally don't take advantage of it. If they're out till 1 a.m, they're in and out. We pretty much know where they are. So we've given our kids a lot more leniency, and by the time they're 17, we pretty much stop interfering in any of their decisions, unless they get in trouble or they want advice. Because they're moving out in a year, and we don't want them to move out and then not be ready to face the world and to be in college away from us in New York and not know what to do.
Yeah, and quickly, I didn't use that particular app. We just have the, whatever, find my phone thingy. And it was purely a safety thing, particularly with my girls. And I don't look at it as a tracking them or whatever. My thing that I said to them all the time was, hey, I can treat you like a 3-year-old or I can treat you like a 17-year-old. It's your choice. So you just tell me what it is. And we did the same thing as they came into their last year with us. We just treated them as the young adult in with everything, with their finances, with their getting up and going to bed, and whether they had a test or not or whatever, all those things. And it started as a relationship a lot earlier, and are all those things out there? Yes. Have they lied to me? Oh, I'm guessing quite a bit, perhaps. But you know what I mean? You just can't be.
So we'll let
I-
some more specific teen questions
Okay.
for that table
All right.
for later, just so that there's
Can I
people
say
with
something
youngs.
really quick before I forget?
Really quick.
Because I forget. Misty mentioned something, but I remember someone telling me that if you discipline or train your child and you're really consistent with them when they're young, and you continually be consistent until they're like 7, right? Then you start to you're able to ease up, and it just
Yeah.
gets a little bit better and a little bit, and there you get ease up and ease up and ease up. And I found that to be very true.
Totally true,
Right?
yeah.
The more consistent we are when they're really young, up until they're 7, and then you start to see, I don't think that's a magic age, but then you can
But
ease
fruits
up
of that.
as they grow.
Yep. Okay, so this one we're going to go into handling a heartbreak. So your child doesn't make a sports team or something like that, that's just really, really devastating.
Yeah.
And then you see them not wanting to put themselves out there again. So what do you do in those situations where you see your child fail and then start shutting down? Do you force them through that, or how do you navigate that?
Well, I would think the first thing I would say is it's not necessarily failure, because it was probably out of their control. So something that they really sought out that didn't happen for them, whether it be musical or sports or whatever it may be. For me, that has happened so much to my kids. I can't even tell you the amount of times that has happened to my kids in all different environments. And I think for me, and I think they would say too, is I was just really present with them in their hurt. And there wasn't really much to say. I just made sure I didn't bag on anybody else. If I was mad about what happened, if I saw that it was a political decision in an athletic team, I know what internally I'm feeling, but I'm not expressing that to them because I don't want them making excuses. I want them to know they did the best they can, and it was outside of them, and that is part of life. As far as the pull away, I had a couple of kids who would pull away a little bit, and my thing and David's thing was just to continually tell them, hey, you know what? Just building them up, right? It's edifying them. You're really good at this. This is a great opportunity. Let's try again. I know this is hard. You can do this. Let's try it again. It still may not go the way you want it to, but you have to. You can't let them just take a back seat because they got knocked down, because we're going to get knocked down in every phase of our life. And so helping them stand back up, for me, it was just a matter of being present and letting them just express what they were feeling and accepting that, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
It's all about encouraging that growth mindset, right? Because
Right.
we're all wired for imperfection and struggle, but and failure isn't really, it's not about failing, it's about getting back up. So
Yeah.
we all are going to fail, and I think reminding them of that, and that, but the real champion is when you get back up and you try again, or you do something, or you keep going forward.
And sharing your life in appropriate stories, where that has happened, to you in a way that they can, whether they're real little and can connect onto that, or when they're older. I was telling my son last night, and he's 23. I was telling him a story of something where there was a fall down, a failure, and what that looked like coming out of it. So one more question, probably.
I think that thinking like when one of my kids was 15 and they got caught smoking pot, and we went on a drive and I told them about when I got caught smoking pot, or when I didn't get caught, I was just smoking pot, and their mouth just dropped like, Mom smoked pot. And I was like, oh my gosh, apparently I haven't told you guys enough about my life. And so I think he was the right age to do it. But at some point, you don't want to like drop this bomb on your kids that like of all the mistakes that you made like in one day, but to start doing it as they're little, so that they understand a little more. And then just take risks and try new things, so that like if you're learning Spanish and your kids are making fun of you, yeah, but I'm trying something new. And no, it doesn't look pretty, but that's the way it is when we learn new things.
That's right.
So children and biblical knowledge, how deeply did you study the Bible with your children? What was most important to you when you were going through scripture with them?
I have to say, this is one that's like super important to me, because we read the Bible with the kids, but you get to a point where it gets super, super hard to do it. When they're like in junior high, to me, it was almost, it is not impossible, but it's really, really hard. But those, from the time that they were little until they were like in 5th, 6th grade, to me, the best thing you can do is teach Sunday school with your kids, or teach a good news club with your kids. Teach anything where you have to be learning the Bible with your kids, so that they come along with you and learn all of it with you and see how important it is. That is we did that for years, and I swear by it. My Ava and Pete were with me, and we were driving somewhere, and they were singing all the old songs from Good News Club that they still remember. That's all straight Bible truth. So that is like my go-to, and I'm super thankful we had that chance.
I erred on the side of not being really religious in my home, because my mom forced us to do devotions, and I hated it. And so I kind of overreacted with that. I had a lot of fun with my children. Chris did kids stuff with them, Sunday school, Awanas, all that kind of stuff, did it together and tried to make things fun, and always had conversations about God and Jesus in our home. You know, they know all the VeggieTales by heart, like things like that, you know. We didn't have TV, we had a VHS, and so my kids watched what I wanted them to watch, and so it was usually all biblically based, and made it a lot of fun. But I asked my children if they wished that I had done more devotions with them, or more like scripture reading with them. And I asked, how did we show Jesus to you? And it was all conversational and relational. And so they saw us, I didn't do devotions with my children, but they saw their dad reading their Bible, or their mom reading their Bible, and then talking about it, and then just doing a lot of things with the whole mindset of like, we're not just hanging out with people because it's fun, but we hang out with people and we love people, and we go through hard things with people because that's what Jesus wants us to do. And they just saw Jesus in our everyday life and conversation. So it wasn't I didn't do devotions with my children. All that to say. So.
I think with me, you probably already know the answer, because I've already talked with you a bit about this. But for me, I just exposed them to the stories of the Bible in any way that I could, you know, whether it be through music or through VeggieTales, or anything that was along those ways, and talking to them about it at their age and stage. I didn't try to do deep theology with them when they were 5 years old, because they probably didn't quite grasp that. But I didn't back off of that when they got older either, as they became more reasoned in their middle school and high school years, having a few of those deeper conversations and teaching them those things along the way. And I think for me, they saw Mom. Mom always got up at least an hour before anyone else in the house did, because that's when I spend time with the Lord, and that's when I study. That's just my habits. That's just what I do. And they saw that. So they were aware of that. They also know that Mom taught Bible study regularly, and they were at Bible study with me. I homeschooled for a small season, so they were there. I have ladies at Bible study who would say to me, I remember when your kids would sit right outside the door doing stuff while you were teaching, you know. So they were exposed to it that way. We weren't heavy on the devotion thing. It's hard to get little ones to sit still and you know, enjoy that or respond to that. But I think exposure in any way that you can, is a good way to bring them into those truths. And as they grow in Christ, as you grow in Christ, is when those deeper conversations and deeper teachings take place. So.
And you know how like when your kids are young, you can sit down at the table and have a good conversation, have dinner together every night, and then they get older and you like, that just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Because they're doing sports, they're like involved in everything. Well, my husband had this idea of implementing, and he kind of went through a phase where he's like, I'm not praying for dinner, that's just a religious exercise. And so we would literally sit down and look at each other and be like, God, thanks for this food, it's awesome. And then just keep eating, right? But, and so we kind of went, and we had our little own spiritual journey. But he did this thing where he would have us like stand and hold hands, and he called it a minute. He's like, let's have a minute. And we would do it like, you know, maybe right outside the car before we were going in somewhere, or we would do it right like inside our house before we were all leaving, or right after a water polo game, we would like walk to the car and stop and do a minute. And it's a minute is when we just hold hands and we look at each other in the eye, and we like literally are quiet for almost a minute while we look at each other, and then just say what we're thankful for and thank God for each other. And that was like, my daughters both commented on that. They both said, we wish we would have done a minute earlier in our lives.
That's
But-
And that's in this book, Habits of the Household, he talks about that, about doing that very same thing.
That's great. We have lots and lots of other good questions that we're just not going to have time to get to. So I'll keep collecting them. And, you know, if there's anything that you don't feel good, like you didn't feel like got hit after your table time and after the end of the morning, you know, please bring them, and maybe we'll, you know, email them to them and, you know, keep a document going or something, because there's lots and lots of good questions. But thank you guys so much. That was really, really great.
You're very welcome. Great. All right, you have about 20, 25 minutes. There's some stuff in front of you that your mentor moms can talk with you about, or anything we talked about up here.